Welcome to Fulton Finance, your source for first-hand information about your tax dollars. I'm Sharon Whitmore, your host and the Deputy Finance Director for Fulton County Government. On today's show, we will take a look at what happened in the 2013 Georgia General Assembly and the impact on Fulton County. There were several bills introduced under the Gold Dome this session related specifically to Fulton County. Some were approved by both the House and the Senate, and others didn't make it to the governor's desk for signature. So we'll take a look at a few of the bills that affect the county's bottom line, like the legislation that would have increased the homestead exemption for residents, but would have significantly decreased county revenue. We'll also discuss the many bills that did pass that deal with the Fulton County justice system, along with several others. There's a lot to discuss, so when we come back, we'll speak one-on-one with the county's legislative liaison. Stay with us. Welcome back to Fulton Finance, your source for first-hand information about your tax dollars. We're talking today about the 2013 Georgia General Assembly and how decisions made under the Gold Dome will impact Fulton County. Our first guest served as the county's legislative liaison this session, Christopher Boyd. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sharon.
First of all, wow, what a session. I really don't recall a legislative session that's ever been so focused on Fulton County. But let's break it down. In total, how many pieces of local legislation were dropped this year that related to Fulton County?
There were 20 bills that related to Fulton County that were introduced this year, and that's really a record. In the end, 14 of them were passed and 4 are still pending. 2 were withdrawn and rewritten, which were later passed.
Can you provide us with a quick summary of the bills that impact the county's budget and our current service delivery model?
Sure. First off was the category that affects Fulton County's revenues. Starting with HB 604, which passed. It restricts the ability of the Board of the Commissioners to raise revenues through the millage rate and suspends their ability to raise the millage rate until January 1, 2015. They can only go up to the revenue neutral rollback rate. After that, it would require a supermajority of 5 votes on the commission in order to raise the millage rate any further. And it's something that later on the finance director will probably talk about. We're expecting a $114 million budget gap for next fiscal year. If we're not allowed to raise the millage rate, we'll have to do that almost entirely through budget cuts. Additionally, there was another bill, HB 541, which would increase the homestead exemption, and it would double it from $30,000 to $60,000. Based on the formula for valuation for property taxes, that means that any home that is worth less than $150,000 would not owe any property taxes to Fulton County. It wouldn't affect the Fulton County Public Schools or the Atlanta Public Schools millage rate or the millage rate for the city that you live in, but it would affect Fulton County's general millage rate and reduce county revenues by about $48 million. The next category of bills was over control over the state and superior courts. It gives them greater control over their budgets, their administration, and personnel. The Board of Commissioners at the beginning of the year would set the budget for the state and superior courts, and then each court administrator would have the right to make line item changes and adjust accordingly. Additionally, there was an increase in the supplemental pay for the Superior Court judges, raising their supplemental pay from $41,900 to $49,700, about a $7,800 increase per judge. And that's also going to affect the state court judges as well as the district attorney, who have supplemental pays that are linked to the Superior Court supplemental pay. And the final category that really deals with Fulton County's employees and service is the bills that change the employees to at-will or unclassified service. All new future employees, employees who change positions or employees who haven't completed their probationary status when the bill goes into effect will be unclassified. And that means they won't have the ability to appeal any disciplinary or termination to the personnel board. When calling the court employees at will, which was a companion bill, has the same effect. But I want to stress that that is only for new employees or employees who change to different positions. You will not lose your classification that you currently have in your current position. There is an exception for public safety officers that was defined in the bill, but that's defined for peace officers, firefighters, and emergency medical professionals. Support staff for those departments or administrative staff for those departments aren't included in that exception.
All of those were dropped as pieces of local legislation, and as I recall, local legislation is handled a little bit differently. How does local legislation, what makes it important that it was local legislation versus like general legislation? What's the difference?
Well, general legislation applies uniformly to across the state to every county or city and municipality that is affected. Local legislation applies only to the affected municipality, in this case here Fulton County. By courtesy, local legislation is constructed and voted on by the local delegation. In this case, there's 25 House members for Fulton County and 13 Senate members for Fulton County. And the local delegation votes on it, and by courtesy, it's then passed on the local calendar by the House and Senate. There's usually no debate on it. It's just allowed by the local delegation.
So a much easier process.
A much easier process, a much simplified process in terms of the number of people voting on it. In some cases, there's only one representative or one senator over an entire county, or even some multiple counties.
Wow. So which of the bills, the pieces of local legislation, did our Board of Commissioners take a formal position on?
There were several that they took a formal position on. The first, of course, was HB 171, which was redistricting of the Board of Commissioners. They also opposed HB 264, which is the MARTA Act revisions, HB 346, which would make the tax commissioner appointed, not elected, HB 347, appointment of the Board of Elections and Registration chairperson, HB 541, the increase the homestead exemption, HB 594, unclassified service for new employees, HB 598, which is the at-will for new court employees, and HB 604, which was the millage rate cap and restrictions.
And which of these bills are still pending or in pending status or held over for a future session?
HB 541, the homestead exemption, the tax commissioner bill, HB 346, and the MARTA Act revisions, which got moved to a different bill. They amended a different bill from the Senate in order to continue on with those MARTA Act revisions.
What do all of these bills mean for local county governance?
Well, as a whole, these bills limited the ability of the county to raise revenues, and they limited the ability of the Board of Commissioners to control certain county functions. In some cases, some people may agree with those changes. Especially, they can seem quite logical to give the courts more control, but there's going to be some implementation issues. In addition, a lot of them were probably political as well.
Well, we have a few minutes left in our session, but I did want to ask you about how the county is preparing for implementation of all of this new legislation.
Well, the big question mark is going to be on HB 604. If it's upheld, it'll have a severe impact on the county operations. And it is the opinion of our county attorney that HB 604 is unconstitutional. Legislation affecting millage rates are supposed to be general legislation, applied uniformly throughout the state, and not just simply affecting one county. The local delegation cited a 1951 local constitutional amendment which gives them the ability to define the date and time that Fulton County applies its millage rates, but it really doesn't speak to the actual rate. And so it's our county attorney's position that this is an unconstitutional bill. But if it's upheld, we may have to cut up to 20% of our budget. And if there are certain constitutionally mandated procedures that can't be cut fully 20%, then other departments may have to have more than a 20% cut. as well, there's going to be some issues implementing. We're going to have to change some procedures in the Human Resources Department to make sure that new employees understand the classification status that they are under when they're hired. And then we're also going to have some implementation as the court changes some of its procedures and hiring practices in order under its new legislation.
And all of this, I'm sure, will take a little bit of time. And I know that the legislative liaison has been involved in the past with pulling together the teams to look at the implementation process. And I believe that we are already in that part of the process as far as trying to evaluate the specific steps that would be necessary.
That's correct. We're getting a final report from the Office of Legislative Counsel that gives us every bill that was passed, both general and local. Obviously, also with some of the general bills, such as the juvenile justice reform, there'll be other changes that our business procedures have to go through. We are working through that process with all of the departments right now, identifying the resources that we need, equipment that we need, different personnel that we need in order to update our policies and procedures in accordance with the new laws.
And the last question that I have for you, you actually have two hats that you wear. One this year was as the legislative liaison, and the other is, of course, as the county's grant procurement officer. So tell us, what are you seeing on the front of state and federal grants relative to state and federal budget reductions, and in particular the sequestration that the federal government has gone through?
Well, there's two things to remember about that. The sequestration was what was noticed and very popular in the news this year. But prior to it, as part of the Budget Control Act of 2011, there were already cuts of 10 to 30% to discretionary budgets from the federal government, where we get a lot of our grants from. We've already seen CDBG be reduced by 20%. We lost about $400,000 last year. The Ryan White grant lost about $600,000 last year. So we've already seen cuts that have come through, about 10 to 20% depending on the grant program. Additionally, this sequestration is going to put 6.5% cuts across the board. There's no discretion by Congress in order to pick certain programs that would get more funding or less funding. It's across the board about 6.5%. So we're going to get that costing us about $4 million this year to our grants program going forward. And we're in the main season, if you will, of getting grants awards right now, between now and through the end of September 30th, which is the end of the federal fiscal year. So we'll have a more clear understanding of how much we've lost by the end of the summer.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and hope if we have the opportunity to have you back on when all is said and done that you'll join us again. When we come back, Fulton CFO gives us a look at the county's financial future following the 2013 General Assembly session. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Fulton Finance, your source for first-hand information about your tax dollars. Some of the decisions made at the state capitol during this legislative session will no doubt impact the county's bottom line. How, you ask? Well, Patrick O'Connor is Fulton's Chief Financial Officer, and he's here with that answer. Welcome back to the show.
How are you today?
Glad you could come. Before we start talking about the legislation, could you take a minute and give us an update of our first quarter results?
Well, the first quarter results for this year in the fiscal 2013, the county's, both its revenues and expenditure budget are on target of what we estimated. So as far as going to 2013, we're okay and we're in good shape, and we're on budgetary target.
And we had some good news during the first quarter. We sold some water and sewer bonds, and they were pretty well received in the market. Would you like to share those results with us?
Yes, the sale, Fulton County has a water and sewer fund. It's about a $120 million operation. We serve over 90,000 customers. and we have debt outstanding on the system. And basically, the county has been looking at refunding these bonds for over a year and a half, and we refunded about $223 million of water and sewer bonds. And quite frankly, the sale was a super success. The county saved almost $60 million in debt service over the next 20 years. On a net present value basis, was over $40 million. In the history of Wall Street, the amount of money that we saved as a percentage of the bonds outstanding was at record high levels. Fulton County was received, the bids on the bonds were oversubscribed. Fulton County has an excellent reputation on Wall Street. So, and as a result of all this, the Fulton County's water and sewer rates are the lowest in the metro area. The Board of Commissioners actually cut our water and sewer rates by about 4% in January. So it's a very great success story.
Great news for customers, too. Let's move on and talk about the legislation this year. House Bill 541, which passed the House but not the Senate, would have increased the homestead exemption up to $60,000. However, House Bill 604, which did pass both houses, suspends the Board of Commissioners' ability to increase the millage rate above the rollback. In simple terms, what does that really mean?
Well, the bottom line, in the last 3 years, Fulton County is the only metro government that hasn't increased their millage rate. You have had the surrounding counties, Cobb, Gwinnett, DeKalb, the city of Atlanta, other smaller cities, have all increased their millage rate by anywhere from 1.5 to 4 mills. Fulton County is the only county that hasn't increased their millage rate. As a matter of fact, since 2009, our tax billings have declined by almost $80 million. And that's basically, you take your tax digest, your millage rate times your tax digest equals the property tax revenues that you receive. So Fulton County has effectively given its citizens an over $80 million tax cut.
Go ahead.
But where we stand now, to the point of your question, is what the state legislature has done by freezing our millage rate for the next 2 years. We've sustained such a large cut in revenues the last year or 2 years that this freezing of the millage rate will definitely cripple the county and impact us in delivering services to the general public. As I sit here, I can't understand the state legislature's actions at all, because Fulton County is the most responsible fiscal county in the metro region. Here we have the lowest water and sewer rates. We have the lowest general fund millage rate, and the state legislature attacks Fulton County. It's insane. Go ahead.
So the millage rate suspension, the impact that it has on our tax-based funds is, you said, crippling. How is it crippling?
Well, basically, with the decline in property values the last several years, and we've kept the millage rate at the same. Fulton County has done everything in terms of efficiency and effectiveness to try to maintain the current level of services. But given how deep the real estate decline has been the last 3 years, that if Fulton County doesn't have the ability to increase our millage rate, we will definitely have to have deep cuts in services in many of our non-mandated discretionary services, such as to Grady Hospital, to the libraries, health centers, senior centers. These are going to be major impacts.
You spent some time during the legislative session trying to educate the public on the crippling effect of the proposed legislation. And there were some reports that the county could absorb the reduction of revenue by cutting waste and improving efficiencies. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes. In the last 5 years, Fulton County has reduced their full-time permanent employees by over 1,000 people. Fulton County, all the department heads, We've gone through all our contracts with all our vendors. We've negotiated lower prices. We're operating as efficiently and as effective as possible. Even the Atlanta Journal-Constitution 6, 7, 8 months ago had a front page article about our employee account and how we stand up to other counties. There's this myth in the state legislature that Fulton County is inefficient and bloated or whatever. Nothing could be further from the truth. Once again, Fulton County has the lowest general fund millage rate in the metro region. We have the lowest water and sewer rates. Fulton County has operated very efficiently and effective. Also, one of the big issues across the country today are pension costs. And Fulton County was in the forefront of creating a defined contribution plan 13 years ago. Our pension costs as a percentage of general fund expenditures are some of the lowest in the country. So I've just sat here and watched the state legislature in action in the last week or 2 weeks, and there's been so much misinformation put out by legislatures without any facts, and it's just ridiculous.
The county last raised its millage rate in which year?
Last time the county even adjusted its millage rate was 1991. Since 1991, not only has the county not raised its millage rate, we have cut our millage rate by over 4 mills in the last 20 years. Not only have we cut the millage rate by 4 mills, but also the state legislature has increased the homestead exemption up to $30,000 for the county. Many of the surrounding counties, the homestead exemption is only $10,000. That increase from $10,000 to $30,000 for Fulton County cost us an additional $24 million in revenues. So for the state legislature to behave and act the way they did in the last so many weeks and look at the history of Fulton County, let me say this, the independent credit rating agencies, our water and sewer fund, high investment grade. Our general fund obligation bonds we issue, high investment grade. So politics aside, the people that rate our credit rate us very high, and they know we're in good condition, they know we're well run, and they have a lot of respect for Fulton County.
Let's spend the last couple of minutes that we have together today talking about the legislation related to the courts. Specifically, there were a couple of bills that were passed that impact court operations, providing them with greater control, line item control over their budgets and their personnel processes. What are the real practical implications of these pieces of legislation?
Well, all the legislation relating to the courts gives them somewhat more discretion within their line items, within their budget, what they can do. But the bottom line is the Board of Commissioners, when they pass the budget, each of the different court operations are given a total dollar budget number, and they can't go over that. So in terms of impacts on the county's finances, et cetera, with the court legislation, the impact is minimal because we control the total dollar amount that the courts can spend, and this legislation just basically says they've got more room to move around the funds within their budget, but we're not being obligated to spend any more money.
So then the legislation increasing their salary supplements will all have to be absorbed within whatever the funding is that's allocated to them. Yes.
So once again, the state legislature is forcing Fulton County, to increase salaries here, and then they're forcing us to have no ability to adjust our revenues. This is another insanity of the state legislature, what's going on in the last so many weeks.
Balancing the budget is always a challenge, and it looks like the 2014 budget process is going to be just as challenging. Thank you, Mr. O'Connor, very much for joining us today. Hope to have you back in a future program.
Nice to be here.
Still to come on the show, a wrap-up of today's topic and contact information for today's guest. Stay with us. As we wrap up today's show, we see the potential impact local legislation has on the delivery of services in Fulton County. Now, the county will evaluate this impact and develop a service delivery plan to ensure compliance with legally mandated services. Many non-mandated services currently offered, such as the libraries, health centers and behavioral health services, art centers and programs, youth and senior services alike, may be reduced or eliminated as the county complies with new legislation. These reductions, coupled with the reduction of funding for many state and federal grant programs, will be felt by all. I hope that today's program has provided you with more insight into the legislative impact on the 2013 and future budgets. Thanks for spending time with us today. We'd love to hear from you if you have suggestions, comments, or questions about the information shared. You can email or call us. The email address is fgtv.feedback@fultoncountyga.gov, and the phone number is 404-612-8317. Thanks for watching Fulton Finances. I'm Sharon Whitmore, and we'll see you next time.